Our departure point was the gateway to the north, Edmonton, from which we flew to Hay River, boarded our boat, and proceeded down the Great River to the Arctic Ocean and Tuktoyaktuk, which can be seen right at the top of the map. This is our first glimpse of the Liard River, an old river tug 60 feet long and built in 1923. She would be our home for the next 3 weeks. Before departing, Claire and Lucille add a little touch of home. The waterfront at Hay River is typical of all northern shipping centers. It is also the operational headquarters of the Yellowknife Transportation Company, whose president, Earl Harcourt, very kindly came down to wish us a bon voyage. The Yellowknife Transportation Company tug YT Marjorie very kindly lent us an extra bilge pump, which fortunately we never made use of. The headwaters of the Mackenzie flow out of the lake cold and clean at about 5 knots an hour, and are the beginning of 1,200 miles of wilderness, interrupted only by little posts such as Fort Providence in the distance. The river dredges are constantly striving to keep the channel clear of the shifting sandbars and the silt brought down by the many rivers which empty into the Mackenzie. One of our first stops was Browning's Landing, which we learned had just been vacated by Mr. Browning. We were told that he is a Mormon, has at least 4 wives and 60-odd grandchildren and children to his credit. Our very talented chef, Bobby, and Claire looking at Fort Simpson in the distance, which was to be our first refueling stop. Some Indian boys eager to pose for the camera, and a family complete with Samoyed pups departing for the lower reaches of the river. A frantic call for help brought the government boat Ekaloo to our position 15 miles below Fort Simpson, where we were beached with a broken fuel pump. She soon departed in an attempt to find replacements at Fort Simpson. The next morning, the Ekaloo was back, after having sent a message to Hay River to send the necessary parts. This is the beginning of the true mountain country of the Mackenzie River, which for the next 500 miles is flanked on the west by the Mackenzie Mountains and on the east by the Franklin Mountains. We passed Lone Mountain, which is part of the Mackenzie Range, the largest group of mountains in the Western Hemisphere. This is John Tetzo of the Slavey tribe and his family. The ever-present dogs, which no Indian family seems to be without. They are a mixture of northern breeds and are chained all summer and only work during the trapping season in the winter. John Tetzo at one time had been the chief, but had given up his role in order to spend more time with his family and to write a column in the mission paper in Fort Simpson, where he and his family lived during the winter. After Lauren did some sketching, we took the whole family, plus grandfather, to show them the Liard River. Following their visit, the children were delighted with Claire's drawing pad and crayons. This scene we were to experience for many nights, with Lauren sketching, followed by a bonfire on the beach. Along this section of the river are what is known as the everlasting fires. Actually, they are lignite beds which have been burning for centuries and were recorded by Mackenzie during his voyage in 1789. The red areas along the beach are where they are located, and at night can be seen glowing red in the darkness. Fort Norman is located at the mouth of Great Bear River, a turbulent stretch of water which drains Great Bear Lake 60 miles to the west. A tremendous inland sea renowned for its fishing, and actually only ice-free for 6 weeks of the year. Great Bear Mountain seems to stand as a lonely sentinel to the entrance of the river. The river was an incredible blue, and we took the opportunity of filling our water tanks. Our next stop was Norman Wells, at which is located the most northerly oil refinery in the world, operated by Imperial Oil Limited. A very ambitious plan was to have oil pumped from here by pipeline built through hundreds of miles of wilderness to the west and Alaska during the war years. However, the war ended before it was ever of any use. The YT Husky, which is the most powerful boat in the north. It is interesting that all the northern tugs have at least 4 and sometimes 6 rudders, which are essential to give them added steering power in the swift water, and all the numerous turns in the river, which they must negotiate with caution. More than one valuable load of cargo has been lost on the river and in Great Slave Lake, particularly during the war years. Bulldozers and other equipment are still being salvaged from the depths. As the navigation season is only some 90 days, everything operates round the clock with thousands of tons of freight moving in both directions. A typical Mackenzie River tow, which is not actually a tow, as the tugs push 3 or 4 barges ahead of them. The reason being to better navigate the swift rapids on the river, which do not toss and boil as we know them in the east. They swirl at a great depth, sometimes as high as 12 knots. We stopped for a while at one of the camps and found these people to be friendly, particularly one chap, Joshua Manuel, who described to us many aspects of how the Indians live in this part of the country. The stench of dead and drying fish was rather difficult to become accustomed to. We finally arrived at the town of Inuvik, which was completely built by the government about 9 years ago. The first thing that struck us was the heating, which is entirely overground, as the permafrost prevents any excavation. All of us were intrigued with our visit to the igloo-shaped church. We thanked Father Adam for our interesting tour of his church and returned to the Liard River. Located about 50 miles north of Inuvik is Reindeer Depot, where every fall the 6,000-odd reindeer in controlled herds are rounded up and counted. About 600 or 700 are shot to provide food for the winter. The skins also serve many useful purposes. On our way to Tuktuk, we came upon the YT Scamp hard aground with her barge. Apparently, she had attempted to navigate in the fog during the night and had gone well out of the channel. Her captain was running the engines and churning up the bottom of the river in an attempt to dig a channel through which he hoped to refloat the barge. As we were to discover later, he was successful. We arrived at Tuktoyaktuk at sundown. The harbor looked desolate and empty, except for an RCMP vessel and other small fishing craft. On the banks is one of the 99-odd Jew-line radar stations which span the north from Alaska to Greenland. With the sun setting over the Arctic, we left this great land with the hope that someday we would return again.